Tonight is the reality check. And the interesting thing is it's not a reality check for us, because we don't believe that we're tzaddik. And I don't even know if we believe that we're beinonim. So this is not even a reality check for us, and it might give us some comfort knowing that there are people who are far more spiritually advanced than we are, and they need this reality check. So it's a funny thing about human psychology that sometimes when we feel inadequate, but then we discover that somebody else is not as advanced as they should be, it helps us feel better about ourselves, even though we're still inadequate. So that's, like I say, this is the reality check. Reality check in what sense? Well, we're in chapter 13, and we've been talking about the Beinoni, and we've been talking about why the Beinoni is not a tzaddik. So a Beinoni is an individual who conventionally is defined as an ordinary person, middle of the road, average kind of individual, and what we've discovered is that's really not the case. And in order to qualify as a Beinoni takes a tremendous amount of spiritual development, and we wish we were anywhere close to being on the level of the Beinoni. This is somebody who has absolute mind control over their emotions. They don't land up in a situation where, oops, I slipped, I did something I wasn't supposed to do, I said something I wasn't supposed to say. The truth is they don't even slip up into, I thought something I wasn't supposed to think, because they have clarity and they have the ability for self-regulation. So as soon as something comes up in their psyche, in their impulse, and they're about to behave in an inappropriate way, there's a virus check, that stops the process, and there's a firewall, and it protects them, and they don't fall into the trap. And as we learned in the last section, we learned that it's because Hashem stands at their side. They've invested so much time and energy in their own personal development that now Hashem supports them to ensure that they don't slip, to ensure that they don't fall into some kind of a spiritual trap of doing something which they shouldn't. Now, from our observation point, when we meet somebody like that, and we see, wow, look at this person. They have so much self-control. They have so much focus. They're so aligned with what they're supposed to be doing. We are going to be their problem. What I mean, we're going to be their problem, because we are the ones who are going to tell them that they are more spiritually advanced than they really are. And by the way, this is something which happens regularly. It happens outside of the scope of the Beinoni. It happens to normal people like us as well, where people come over to us and they give us inflated compliments. And the reason they give us inflated compliments is because they are impressed, and they mean well, and they'd like to express to us how impressed with us they are. What happens to us is sometimes we feel uncomfortable. Why are you giving me such a big compliment? Why are you putting me on a pedestal? You don't know the full story. You don't know what's going on the inside. And we may even reach a point of feeling imposter syndrome. Me? You think I'm I'm just an ordinary person who struggles along with everybody else. So multiply that when you're dealing with a Beinoni, because a Beinoni is a unique human. And if you meet a Beinoni, as we might be privileged to do at some point in our lives, you look at this person and you say, wow, they are incredibly advanced. And so we become their problem, because we make the assumption that based on their behavior and based on their self-regulation, they must be a tzaddik, and then we tell them that. So it was with that in mind, right at the beginning, in the first chapter of Tanya, that the Alter Rebbe quoted the Gemara, where the Gemara warns a Beinoni and says, you are supposed to, before you were born, your neshama made a commitment, a pledge to Hashem. And your pledge was that you're going to be a tzaddik and you're not going to be a rasha, which is a pledge that's equal to all of us. We all have a responsibility to do everything in our power to aspire to be a tzaddik, and everything in our power to ensure that we don't become a rasha. That's what's supposed to happen. I'm not saying that's what happens practically, but that's what's supposed to happen. That's the expectation of our soul. But then the Gemara continued with what sounded like a disturbing anecdote, where it says, and even if the entire world tells you that you are a tzaddik, you should not listen, and instead you should view yourself ke rasha. And last time we spoke about this, what does it mean, ke rasha? It does not mean that you're supposed to see yourself as wicked. You're not supposed to define yourself as a rasha. If you know that you're self-regulated, and you know that you're focused, and you know that you don't give in to various temptations and so forth. You know that you don't do that. So there's no value in calling yourself a rasha. Rather, it is ke rasha, that there are elements of your personality, your experience, your spiritual development, your challenges, which are similar to, not the same, but similar to the challenges that a rasha has. That's the messaging we have to the Beinoni. So if the whole world is telling you that you're a tzaddik, you need to have an honest self-assessment. You need to know who you really are. Because, as we discussed last week, if a person doesn't know who they are, then they have almost zero chance of improving, of growing. What's the baseline? If I have an exaggerated view of who I am, what kind of growth am I going to experience? So it's actually not doing anybody a favor by inflating their sense of self. And it's certainly not doing ourselves a favor by pretending to be that we're something we're not. So the Beinoni has to know how to do an honest self-assessment, look in the mirror with integrity and say, I am a Beinoni. It's a huge achievement. It's something to be proud of, although pride is obviously not necessarily helpful in a person's spiritual development. But it is not a tzaddik, and we have to have that absolute clarity. Why not? Here comes the reality check. That's what we're going to be learning this evening, the reality check of the Beinoni. So if you're looking inside the book, it's on page 56, and I'm going to go back just a little bit. Actually, I'm going to go back to page 54, at the bottom of the page. And we're going to start with the third last word on the page, which is the word Elah. In other words, we're saying, instead of buying the rhetoric, the messaging that people tell us, that we're so amazing and we're a tzaddik, again, we're referring over here to the Beinoni, instead of listening to that, instead of accepting that rhetoric, we should view ourselves ke rasha, similar to, or in certain ways, facing the same kind of challenges that a rasha faces. Okay? So what does that mean? If you're looking on the screen, it's the fifth line, the third last word on the line. If you look in the book, it's page 54, the third last word on the page. Ela yiyeh be'einav. Rather, instead of listening to all of the beautiful accolades that people are giving us, rather, the Beinoni yiyeh be'einav should appear in his own self-estimation Ki'ilu mehusoi be'atzmusoi shel hara, as if the very essence of negativity, the toxic energy inside himself, hu betokfoi u bigvurasoi b'cholol asmoli, is as powerful and as strong as it was when the person was born. Because remember, a Beinoni is somebody who came in from the cold. The Beinoni wasn't always such a spiritually focused person. They were an ordinary person like everybody else, with the same failures and the same temptations and the same weaknesses and the same laziness and the same whatever it is that people have, resentment, whatever it is. They had the same, and they worked on themselves, and they worked on themselves, and they worked on themselves. So the first thing they need to know is their adversary has not weakened just because I have strengthened. It's a really important piece of information. Now, I remember once hearing that there's a society here in Joburg that offers support to people, God forbid, who have lost children. And they have a slogan that they teach the people who unfortunately have to come through their doors, tragically have to come through their doors. And the slogan is that it's false when people tell you that time heals. Time does not heal grief. And it's a common experience that people have when they experience grief, that days go by, weeks, even years go by, and it's quite possible for the grief to remain as strong as it was. So their slogan is, time does not heal, we learn to become stronger. It's an incredibly empowering message for a person who's confronting grief, because very often around them, the people are telling them, you know, you have to be strong and you'll get there in time, and take it day by day, which are all valid points. You'll get there and it will take day by day. But to say that time heals doesn't necessarily help and doesn't necessarily work. To tell a person that they become stronger, that's an encouraging message. You learn resilience. You learn to be able to tackle things that previously used to overwhelm you. Now, the truth is, you don't have to be as dramatic or extreme as to talk about major grief. Your personal trainer at the gym will tell you the same thing. As you progress in the gym, he's not going to make the work easier. That would defeat the purpose. To the contrary, as the person gets better at whatever particular exercise regime they're following. So what has to happen is you make the workout tougher. That's what has to happen, because that's what allows a person to grow. So it would be a little bit far-fetched to imagine that a Beinoni, okay, a tzaddik is a different category, and we'll deal with a tzaddik perhaps in another conversation, but a Beinoni, who's an ordinary person, who's been working on themselves and developing themselves and overcoming hurdles and slowly taking control of one part of their life and then the next part of their life and this particular challenge and that particular challenge, and they have victory after victory. It would be illogical to assume that the end result of that is that Hashem says, okay, I'll take the pressure off now. You've done so well. Let's celebrate you. Let's allow you to enter retirement. That's antithetical to Judaism. So the Beinoni has to recognize that despite their growth and development, the adversary is no weaker. That's Kerasha, the challenger, the nemesis in the Beinoni's life is equally powerful to the nemesis in the Rasha's life. It's just that the Beinoni has become stronger. So that's what he has to know. The Beinoni has to have the reality check that the negativity that is built into my system is as powerful and as resilient as it was at birth. It's no less so. In fact, as we'll see in a moment, your sparring partner also gets stronger. That's the nature of the interaction. Again, it's naive to believe that if I'm fighting my Yetzer Hara and fighting the negative inclinations and fighting toxic thinking, that it will naturally weaken those elements. To the contrary. They'll also learn, as if it's, we're kind of anthropomorphizing a bit, they'll also learn different techniques, different ways of responding to us, more subtle attacks. So not only does it not weaken because I have strengthened, but let's have a look what happens. That force of negative energy has not been exchanged for any alternate energy, nor has it disappeared, me'uma, not an iota. It is such an incredible lesson. Let's talk outside of the personal space for a moment and talk on the national level or the global level for a moment. How does it land up that you could have a country with highly sophisticated military intelligence, with amazingly advanced tech, with some of the brightest minds, military minds in the world? How does it happen that such a country can be invaded by a motley group of people who don't have anywhere near the technology, and dare I say, anywhere near the intellectual capacity? How does it happen? It's only one way it happens. And that's if we, the defenders, let our guard down. And we imagine that somehow they hate us less than they did last month, or last year, or 10 years ago. It's no different in spiritual terms. If I reach a point where I've devised systems that keep me spiritually focused, and I go to shul, so I'm surrounded by like-minded people, and I attend shiurim, so I'm filling myself with resources and with material that helps me to confront my issues and to overcome my issues, which of course are all valid, valuable, integral parts of personal development. But if I then fool myself into thinking because I have grown and developed, therefore my internal nemesis is naturally weaker, that actually puts me in a weaker, not a stronger position. If I believe with all our weapons, with all our tech, they became weaker, well then they can actually break through my border. So that's what he's telling us. Reality check for the Beinoni is to recognize it hasn't shifted one iota. The threat level is not reduced. I know we all like to see when the threat level goes from critical to just very scary. from red to bright orange or whatever the particular system is, we all breathe a sigh of relief. It's not necessarily an accurate depiction. It's just the current state of affairs. So the Beinoni sitting, for example, and again, we don't have to go as extreme as the Beinoni. That is what the Tanya is talking about. But let's just make this relatable for a moment. We could sit here around this table, having this conversation, learning this material, and feel, you know what, I'm a different person because I know this information now. I've never thought of things this way. And now suddenly I have this information in my head and it's amazing. So therefore I'm a different person. Therefore my challenges have reduced. We're going to be mighty disappointed when we walk out of this room and discover, guess what? While we were learning, our Yetzer Hara was having a power nap. So that as soon as we walked out of this room, it could come back and hit us with some kind of a new technology or some kind of a new confrontation. So reality check for the Beinoni is certainly and exponentially a reality check for us. Model behavior does not indicate mastery. That's what the Beinoni needs to know. The Beinoni has model behavior, has amazingly calibrated, focused behavior in thought and in speech and in behavior. That does not mean that there is mastery. There's still a threat out there. Not only that, ve'adrab, like I alluded to earlier, just because you're getting stronger does not mean your sparring partner is getting weaker. To the contrary, because that is your sparring partner, they're getting stronger. Anybody who is honest about their spiritual development can identify this. When I used to be, fill in the blanks, when I used to be not observant, when I used to be generally ignorant of what the Torah teaches, when I used to be someone who had never worked on self, I didn't have these challenges that I have now. There's clear evidence that as we develop, so the other side of our persona also develops, except it has an advantage, it has an edge. Listen to what he's going to say next. Through the passage of time, our internal spiritual nemesis has become stronger, not only because we've become stronger, and it's obviously looking to, so to speak, catch us out in more subtle or challenging areas, but practically. What feeds the neshama and what feeds the other side? Remember, these are two sides of our persona. This is like our spiritual Jekyll and Hyde. So what feeds our neshama? Let's think about this for a moment. What empowers our neshama? What allows our neshama a voice in our daily experience? What's the food of the neshama? What's the toolkit of the neshama? I don't know. You tell me. What empowers the neshama to be able to impact us? Okay, so everybody always makes the same mistake. And everybody always says spirituality, which is problematic. Why is it problematic? I'll tell you why. If a person follows a particular spiritual path that happens to be pagan, is that aligned with Judaism? No. Is it spiritual? Yes. Spirituality is not what empowers the neshama necessarily. Let's say somebody has a gift, either real or imagined, that they could communicate with the spirits of people who have passed away. Is that kosher? No. Is it spiritual? Yes. Either it's spiritual or it's mishagas, but or it's purely taking people for a ride, you know. Spirituality does not empower the neshama. So what empowers the neshama? Doing what Hashem wants. Every time I learn Torah, my neshama gets a little bit stronger. It's able to communicate its message more clearly to my cerebral cortex. Every time that I do a mitzvah, it empowers my neshama. It allows me to translate behavior into something that is aligned with what Hashem wants. What does it take to empower the other side of our character? The toxic side, the dark side, the animal soul, or worse, the Yetzer Hara. What does it take to empower that? What's the opposite? Not doing what Hashem wants. Okay? Let's listen closely to what you just said. Not doing what Hashem wants. You did not say doing what Hashem does not want. Can you hear the difference? Let's explore this difference for a moment. Okay, give me an example of doing what Hashem wants. Anything, the first thing that comes to your mind. Doing what Hashem wants. I'm really disappointed. I was sure you were going to say coming to the Tanya Shir. I mean, it's very beautiful to say loving Hashem and loving your fellow Jew and all that, but okay. So coming to the Tanya Shir would be an example of doing what Hashem wants. No question. What would be an example of doing something that Hashem does not want? Doing something against the Torah. So, for example, if a person were to steal, that is doing something that Hashem does not want. Now, what is an example of not doing what Hashem wants?
Not coming to the shir.
Not coming to the shir is doing what Hashem does not want. Hashem wants you at the shir. So therefore, if you choose not to come to the shir, you're doing what Hashem does not want. Give me an example of doing something which is not what Hashem wants. Interesting, right? Now we're all caught off guard. I'll give you an example. Very simple example. How did you get here tonight? You drove.
Yeah.
Does Hashem want humans to drive cars? I mean, Hashem obviously gave the wisdom to human beings to be able to develop the technology to drive cars, but that doesn't mean there's a value in driving a car. In other words, if you have nowhere to go and you drive around the block in circles, is that what Hashem wants? No. So driving a car is not what Hashem wants. It's a tool that could be used for what Hashem wants, or could be used not for what Hashem wants, without being toxic. So that's why it's very accurate to discern that what feeds the dark side, the Yetzer Hara, and then certainly the Nefesh HaBahamis, is not only doing contrary to what Hashem wants. Yes, if a person does something contrary to what Hashem wants, it is going to feed the darkest part of their persona, the actual Yetzer Hara. But you know what else feeds the Yetzer Hara? Listening to your favorite music in the car. Eating supper. Any physical, material thing is the language of the other side of our persona. It's not the language of the neshama. The neshama does not need supper. Okay, Hashem wants us to eat so that the neshama will stay inside the body. True. But that's not why we eat. How many people sit down at the dinner table and say before they eat, the only reason I'm eating right now is to preserve my neshama inside my body because that's what Hashem wants. Nobody does that. Nobody's like, we're having this again for supper? Can't you change up the menu a little bit? You start adding salt, you start trying to garnish the thing. Why? Because we're not feeding the neshama. At the end of the day, it's the language of the body. It's the language of the animal soul. It's the language of the Yetzer Hara. So every time we take an enjoyable piece of food and put it into our system, who is being fed by default? All the negativity inside of it. That's what it thrives on. Not because I'm doing something bad, but just because that's what it lives off. Until I translate that food into something spiritual, or more correctly, something holy, that food is only feeding that side of me. Which means every single day of our lives, most of our day, unless we're very conscious, we're empowering the side of ourselves that gets in the way of our spiritual development. Without thinking, without malice, without rebellion, it's just a fact. I'll give you another example. Have you ever heard people say the calories don't count on Shabbos? Never heard that? Shabbos, the calories. Who says that the calories don't count on Shabbos? The person hosting you for the meal. The person hosting you for the meal wants you to have another portion, and then they want you to have dessert. So they're the ones always telling you there are no calories on Shabbos. The calories don't count on Shabbos. Okay, fair enough. So get on the scale after Shabbos, then they count. Well, where did this mishugas come from? That the calories don't count on Shabbos. What is there? Do we honestly, as Jewish people, believe that there's some kind of biological shift that happens inside our bodies just because it happens to be Shabbos? Maybe if we were tzaddikim and we were completely aligned both between the body and the soul, then the reality of the neshama feeling that it's Shabbos would have an impact on the body, and maybe the body would process differently. We're not those people. We're ordinary people who at the end of the Shabbos meal have to loosen our belt. That tells you the calories are there somewhere, right? So where did this mishugas come from? The people say the calories don't count on Shabbos. Very simply, calories feed the physical side of self. Because Shabbos is a day which is a holy day, and therefore enjoying Shabbos is mandated by the Torah, if I eat food as part of my enjoyment of Shabbos, that food won't feed the dark side of my personality. It will feed my neshama. Because that's a holy experience of eating. It's going to have nothing to do with my weight gain. Nothing to do with my level of cholesterol. Just simply, did I tell you the other day, I typed a message. We were having cholent at shul. So I typed a message to send to the shul to say there's cholent this Shabbos. And autocorrect, you cannot make this up, changed the word cholent to cholesterol. True story. Anyway, so cholent can affect your cholesterol. And the second helping of dessert affects the calories. But this food does not feed the dark side of my personality because it's Shabbos. And if I were to eat food during the course of the week, with that kind of consciousness that is, so to speak, gifted to us on Shabbos, in other words, if I had to eat during the course of the week with this awareness that I'm here to serve Hashem and therefore I'm fueling my system so I could do more of what Hashem wants, that food would also not weigh me down spiritually. But that's not common. So through the course of a person's life, what's happened? The eating and the drinking and every other form of physical indulgence has just empowered the negative side of our persona. Therefore, the Beinoni should not make the mistake of thinking, because I am stronger, therefore naturally the other side of myself has become weaker. That's not true. And it's really important to know. Reality check. Now, I know, well, the Alter Rebbe effectively says, I know what everybody's going to say. Yes, of course, that's dealing with ordinary folk. You know what ordinary folk is, like you and I. Ordinary folk are people who enjoy it, what happens to be on the menu. It's like, I think, I don't know if this is a thing or if it's just something I imagined, but I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that they screen shows like MasterChef at the same time that people are eating dinner at home. So you've got this dissonance between what's on the screen and what's on the plate. It's a form of torture in a sense, where they're showing people this is how you could really indulge in the materialism of this world versus nebuch, the indulgence that you have. But the reality is that that's going to happen. That's going to happen to all of us. We're going to be feeding the beast, and therefore the beast is going to be stronger. And even if we feel we have mastery, and even if we have evidence of the fact that we're behaving far better than how we behaved last year, and this year's Al Khait, we have a clear conscience about certain of the things that plagued us last year, or in the case of the Beinoni, where there's this perfect score, they got a perfect 10 in terms of their behavior, they have to realize that they've still fed the beast, and it hasn't gone away, and they have to be as vigilant as ever. Says the Alter Rebbe, I better know what you're going to say. That's normal people. But not everybody's like that. So let's read on what he says. V'af mi shebetoras Hashem cheftzoi. Even if you have a person whose passion in life is learning Torah. In other words, they're not sitting down to dinner with MasterChef. They're sitting down to dinner with a shiur. That's what gives them pleasure. And even a person, not only are they passionate about Torah learning, but they are invested in Torah study day and night. Invested. You know what invested means? How do you know you're invested in Torah study? I'll tell you. You get a few different ways that people study Torah. One way the person studies Torah is they check in and they check out. So the shiur starts at a particular time, I'm there. The shiur ends at a particular time, I sat here till the end. But in between the arrival and the departure, they're all over the place. And I'm not talking about somebody who's ADHD. I'm talking about somebody who's just, they're not invested. They're not invested. It's a little bit like the story of the guy who finished the Amidah. And the rabbi came over to him and said, Shalom Aleichem. He says, what do you mean, Shalom Aleichem? I've been here the whole time. He says, you were physically here, but I have no idea where you were during the Amidah. That was not here. So Shalom Aleichem, welcome back. Then you can get a person who is more invested, which means they sit down to learn, and they know when the shiur starts, or the commitment that they've made to personal learning starts at such and such a time, it ends at such and such a time. They don't look at the watch from the start time till the end. Maybe they have an alarm or something that reminds them when it's time to do the next activity. And they're completely focused at that time. But if the phone rings, or worse, if a WhatsApp message beeps, they have to check it. Because you don't know. There might be a nuclear holocaust pending if I don't answer that WhatsApp message. I could be saving the whole world right now. So, got to check So they're invested, but they're invested to the extent that there is room for disturbance. Then you get a person who's learning Torah in a completely different way. The Rebbe once told people, and I thought it was incredibly insightful if you consider that this conversation must have happened back in the 80s. So the Rebbe once, I think it was more than once, because I've seen it in more than one place, where the Rebbe told people that when you study Torah, you should treat the phone as if it were Shabbos. Can you imagine? In the 80s, what could the phone do to you already? It could ring. A big deal. So the phone rang, compared to what the phone could do now. So imagine somebody so invested that while they're learning Torah, they put the phone away. There isn't the possibility, unless there's a genuine emergency, in which case, unfortunately, we know that people find a way to reach us in a genuine emergency. Nothing's going to disturb them. They're completely invested in Torah. Or you can get a person who's invested in Torah to the extent that they don't even know what's going on around them. They completely lose sense of their surroundings. That's truly invested in Torah learning. I've heard stories of Rabbi Yoel Khan, who was the chief, if you want, editor, but more than editor. It's called a choizer. That's somebody who would repeat the teachings that the Rebbe said on Shabbos and Yom Tov, so he would memorize it all. And he was in charge of a whole team of people who would memorize the Rebbe's talks over Shabbos and Yom Tov so that they could record them after Shabbos. What would happen is after Shabbos, he would work with the team. They would then transcribe what they had heard. They would then submit it to the Rebbe for review. In the earlier years, the Rebbe didn't immediately edit. In the later years, they were almost immediately edited, those talks, and then they could be published. And what he would do, because it's a different brain process to memorize and to study. So while he was listening to the Rebbe, he'd be memorizing. Once the published work came out, he'd sit down to study it for the first time. So they tell the story that sometimes he would sit down in the main shul in 770 Eastern Parkway. He would sit down and he'd begin to study the discourse that had just been released. And people would come back sometimes 24 hours later and he was still there, oblivious to what had happened, oblivious to the fact that there was a passage of time, that there were minyanim going on around him, that there was tumult, completely immersed. Imagine being like that, yoimam v'layla, day and night. That degree of immersion in Torah, and not only that, lishma. Because when it comes to learning Torah, there's also the question of motivation. What's my motivation? So we say we're supposed to study Torah lishma. What does it mean to have the right motivation? What kind of motivation? So again, some people learn Torah with terrible motivation, ulterior motives. The reason that I'm learning Torah is because that way, the next time I'm in shul and the rabbi says something, I could show him how smart I am because I've already researched the topic and I can even catch him out maybe on an issue that he raised in his presentation because I've researched the topic. That would be a very unhealthy motivation to learn Torah. Why am I learning Torah? To show everybody what a big deal I am or to be able to create chaos. The only thing that could be worse than that is the person who studies Torah in order to find evidence to be able to make fun of the Torah, which unfortunately some people do. Or a person could say, I'm learning Torah. Why? Because I need to know practically. I need to know, what does it mean to be a Jewish person? What are you supposed to do as a Jewish person? What are the practical laws? We're coming up for Rosh Hashanah. It's the month of Elul. What am I supposed to be doing? Do I have to hear the shofar? Can I listen to a recording? Do I have to daven this? Do I have to daven that? What does teshuva mean? Oh, really practical stuff. I want to do the right thing, and in order to do the right thing, I have to have information. So that's why I'm learning Torah, in order to have that information. Is that a bad reason to learn Torah? It's an excellent reason to learn Torah. It's not yet lishma. What's lishma? Studying Torah for its sake. Why am I learning Torah? Because that's what Hashem wants me to do. That's the highest level of Torah learning. Why am I learning? Because that's what Hashem wants me to do. And actually, if a person's at that level, the subject matter isn't even that relevant anymore. Okay, I happen to love Gemara, but Hashem wants me to learn Torah. So whichever Torah is available, that's what I'm going to learn. So again, here we're talking about a person who is invested, truly invested in Torah learning, day and night, for the right reasons. How would you feel about such a person? If you met such a person, how would you think of them? Tzaddik. Unbelievable. Who does that in today's world? Who has that level of focus? Who has that level of interest, of dedication? Tzaddik. Says the Alter Rebbe, Ein zoi hoichocho klal shenitche hora mimekoimoy. The fact that this person is so focused, the fact that this person is so dedicated, the fact that this person is so invested in Torah study is zero evidence of the fact that their dark side is no longer a dark side. Model behavior is not evidence of mastery. Ella, it's still possible. It could be that the Yetzer Hara, or whatever you'd like to call it, the evil inclination, the negative side, the toxic thinking, is as powerful and as entrenched in that person's reality as before. Again, they have become stronger. That does not mean that the enemy is weaker. So how then is this person so disciplined? How are they so focused? How are they so invested? Rak shelevushav, because if you're looking at what we call the garments, which, if you remember in chapter 4, we said that the soul has to have garments. It has to have various kinds of interfaces that it could use to interact with the world, because it's ultimately a spiritual being living in a physical space. How does a spiritual being interact with a physical space? It needs some kind of interface. That's what we call the levushim. So, in the case of this person who is a Beinoni, and especially the Beinoni who's studying Torah all day long with absolute investment, what they have succeeded in doing is that the animal soul never gets to use those interfaces. In other words, let's talk in language that certain individuals here would appreciate, right? Let's say somebody tries to hack your computer or your phone, your WhatsApp, right? Recently, there were a whole lot of people who had their WhatsApps hacked. Somebody wants to hack into your WhatsApp account. What do they want? They want to take control of your account and masquerade as you. And then their objective is typically to get personal information and passwords and maybe access bank accounts and who knows what. But the key is they want to use your tool for their malevolent intentions. That's what the Nefesh HaBahamis wants. And we learned this in chapter 9, where we spoke about the fact that a human being is essentially like a city which is under siege from two different kings, each of which is trying to take control of the city. And whoever's going to take control of the city will be able to use all of the resources of the city for their ends. One is a good king, one is a bad king. So the animal soul, the Nefesh HaBahamis, all at once is to be able to take control of the system, to hack in and take control. So that, what do you think? Animal ideas. What do you say? Crass things. What do you do? Inappropriate things. That's what the Nefesh HaBahamis wants. Just enjoy life. Don't worry about higher ideals and responsibility and altruism and none of that. The Beinoni ensures that never happens. So the Beinoni has incredibly solid antivirus spiritual software. Does that mean the hackers have gone away? Does it mean the hackers are not going to try different hacks? Does it mean that the hackers are not evolving and becoming better at their game? Of course not. All of that is true. The degree of attacks is constantly evolving and is a constant part of the reality if you want to have tech. Which means you've got to constantly work to ensure that the virus software is up to date. That's where the Benoni lives. The Benoni has the right protocols in place to ensure that the hijack can never happen, that the hack can never break through. But that doesn't mean if you've got to fight every single day of your life to hold your ground, then you haven't achieved mastery. You've just found ways to keep yourself where you need to be. So therefore, Einon mislabshin b'moyach. Therefore, the Benoni is able to ensure that the processes of the animal soul do not invade his brain, vehapeh, or his mouth, v'hayodayim or shar evrei haguf, or any other part of the physical limbs of the body. Can't get me to think like you. You can't get me to speak like you. You can't get me to do the things that you want to do, Mr. Animal Soul. That's what the nefesh, that's what the Benoni says. And even that is, as we said at the beginning of this chapter, not their independent success. And mipnei Hashem shenasan shlita umemshala lemoyach al halev. It's because, as we said at the beginning of this chapter, we said that the nature, the dynamics of the conflict, internal conflict of the Benoni, is that you've got a nefesh elokis, which is the one judge offering an opinion about how life should be, and you have a nefesh abahamis, an animal soul, which is the other judge offering a different opinion about how life should be. But as we've learnt in Jewish law, you cannot have an even court. You've got to have an odd number so that you can have a majority, and that's where Hashem weighs in as the so-called third judge, empowering us not to conform or not to fall prey to whatever it is that the Nefesh HaBahamis wants to do. V'lochein, Nefesh Oilikis Shebemoyach Moisheles Be'ir Ketana Evrei Haguf Kulam. Therefore, and we'll probably restart again from this line next week, but therefore, the Nefesh Oilikis is able to retain control of the mini city, which is the metaphor that we're using for the human body. It still has things in check. And that's the Benoni's reality. The Benoni's reality is that the neshama is the voice I listen to because it's propped up by Hashem, but the nefesh habahamis and Yetzer Hara are still really significant adversaries that you've got to actually think about. You've got to take into consideration, and therefore, ke Rasha, he considers himself similar to a Rasha, just like a Rasha is under the sway of his negative side. The Benoni has to recognize that he still is susceptible, should he allow his guard to drop, he's still susceptible to the negative side. Okay, and then, like I say, we'll continue from that line, please God, next week, just to understand a little bit better how the neshama has control over the function of the Benoni, and that does not mean that he has mastery over the essence of the Benoni. Very important distinction. Okay, as we'll see next week.